You're not a beginner because you learned to sew ages ago and you did a good job and you made fabulous clothes that you were proud to wear. But lately, when you sit down at your sewing machine, you've been feeling a lot like a beginner. And it's probably because you haven't sewn in ages. And it's not because you didn't want to, it's because life got in the way. You had other responsibilities, you had family, you had work. And now that you finally got some time in your schedule, you're wondering, did I ever really learn how to sew? Why is nothing working out the way that I thought it would? And why do I keep ripping out the seam over and over again? Today, I'm taking you back to the early years of Sew Lounge, back to 2020 all the way through early 2022 to show you the garments that I made and tell you what worked, what didn't, but more importantly, what I learned through the process of coming back to sewing after not having done it for many, many years. So keep watching. Hi, I'm Tony, and this is Sew Lounge. Now, I lost my job in 2020, like many people did, and I found myself with a whole lot of time on my hands. And that seemed like the perfect opportunity to get back into Sew Lounge and create it. And so I started sewing regularly because I had nothing else to do. And these are the different projects that I made back then. Now, the very first thing I made once the world shut down was this skirt. And this is some waxed cotton that my sister bought me when she was on a work trip in Zambia. And I had had this for a while and I really liked it. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to make a cute little A-line skirt. It'll just be fun. Not that there was anywhere to wear it in 2020 because nobody was leaving their houses. But I was like, oh, I'm just, I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it. It's going to be easy. It's going to be great. So invisible zipper in the back because that is my specialty. So I did a good job on this. I finished the edges of the facing. I tacked them down at the zipper, but nowhere else. I did not finish the seams. I don't know why, because obviously I had my serger threaded with purple thread, so that would have been fine. And then how did I finish this? I did not finish the slit either, but I did finish the hem. So not horrible. Once again, just getting into the swing of things. So the most important lesson I learned from this was measure yourself before you start sewing because this skirt never fit because it's a size 14. So at some point it will fit. I am, working on getting back in shape and getting back down to a pattern size 14. But alas, I have never worn this skirt, but it looks pretty. Finishing seams has always been a challenge for me because I just don't think about it, and that's the reality. If you look at commercial patterns, it'll tell you to sew stuff, then it'll be like, finish the seams. But it doesn't really tell you like how, and it'll tell you like the first time you're supposed to finish a seam, but then it doesn't tell you again, and so inevitably, I just forget. This was the second thing I sewed in 2020. And if you go back and look at my very early videos from 2021, that is where you will see these garments all showcased, or parts of them anyway. So this was the first time I put in a bias seam finish. I had not ever done that before. And I just wanted to do a basic dress. Notice, still no sleeves because I had a sleeve phobia up until very recently. And inside seams not finished. They are all pressed open so they look nice. And, it's not a bad dress. So what I learned from this was that if your skirt is slightly A-line, you probably need to use some basting stitches when you finish that hem. So you don't have to just kind of jam it in on the side seams to get that finish done. I forgot about that. And I did put some basting stitches in, but I didn't ease it all the way around, so it's just eased at the side seams, so it's a little lumpy. Moving forward, I don't exactly remember which of these were late 2020 and then into 2021. So this was a dress I made. It has an uneven hem, so it has a hem facing. And you can watch that video on how to put in a hem facing. It has some bias tape as the neckline. And this has raglan sleeves, which you can't really see very well because of the print. But the thing I learned from this dress, which I still have to go back and fix, is that when you have a dart in the shoulder, you have to fit it to your shoulder before you start sewing it, or it's going to look funny. And I didn't know that because this is the very first garment I ever made that had a dart in the shoulder. And so I ripped those out and I still have to go back and fix them because I really like this fabric and I really want to wear this dress. But when I put it on after making it, I have these weird like points on the shoulders because the darts weren't like, and it was like standing up closer to the neckline. And then it had a weird point on the shoulder at the tip of the dart. And then it was kind of standing. So that had to be fixed. And then I didn't ever put a closure on that neckline. So now this skirt was a lesson in pattern placement to make the most of your fabric because I knew that I wanted this to really accentuate this fabric. And there's a center back seam. So I did a lot of pattern placement to make sure that the scene on the back with the people or the skeletons and the church, that I wanted it to like look like it was all the same piece. And I think I succeeded in that. But what I did not succeed in was the finishing on the inside of this skirt. I recently got a question on the video about putting in the ruffle, which is, you know, it's in there. It's in the catalog if you want to go back, and how to put in a ruffle. I did a really nice job. The ruffle's very, very even. And I got a question under the video saying like, oh, how did you finish that edge? Did you, take out the basting and then trim it, or, what did you do? And the reality was I didn't do anything. It still looks exactly the same way it did when I sewed it. Now I have worn this and I have washed it, so you can see that there's some raveling going on along that seam edge. And I did pull this out to put next to the serger because that does need to be finished. This is a skirt I really like and I enjoy wearing. So I need to take care of that problem. I just totally forgot about it. And once again, seam finishes, not at the top of my list of things to do. So that's definitely something I need to work on. This dress helped me overcome many fears that I have faced in my sewing career. I found it, this is a McCall's pattern. This dress has a lot of videos to go with it. So if you want to make this dress, there's like 8 videos of all the various parts of me putting this dress together because it was such a challenge for me that I did everything at like one step at a time. So there is a yoke in the back, okay? There are patch pockets with flaps on them. There are set-in sleeves. There is a collar, and there are buttonholes. So I had failed at collars in college. That's why none of these garments have collars. I was terrified of set-in sleeves. That's also why none of these garments have set-in sleeves, and how nothing prior to this point has a set-in sleeve. I always choose patterns with other sleeve options. The yoke wasn't super scary, but I'm not a pocket person. So, making a pattern that had patch pockets and having to get them even and, straight and everything. And then buttonholes are another thing that I've been terrified about for a very, very long time. And I got it done. So I'm proud of this dress. I actually really like this dress. I'm generally very proud of this dress. I do wear this dress a lot. I do like it. It is great for summer. I pair it with like some black leggings and then kind of wear it like a jacket kind of dress. And I did try to finish the seams. I used a zigzag stitch, which is not probably as small as it needs to be. It is not probably close enough to the edge as it needs to be. And so as a result, my fabric is fraying along the seam finishes, even though I did actually finish them. This was not the best option for this type of fabric, but I did not realize how the fabric was going to go after, being washed. So you can see that on this yoke seam, it's definitely fraying quite a bit. Thankfully, I did do a double row of stitching in there to kind of finish that edge, but I need to come up with a better solution. And maybe I'll make a video about going back and finishing seams on projects that you've already sewn, and we'll see how that goes. But all in all, I am very proud of this dress because I overcame a lot of fear with it and realized that it wasn't as horrible as I thought it would be, and I was just still having PTSD from college and being graded on projects. And one other thing that I remember that was almost a total disaster is when I marked these buttonholes, I used a quilting chalk pencil and it didn't come off. So I actually had to wash this dress like 3 times before I ever wore it because it had all these white lines. It had like a center line for the buttons, and then it had all the markings. So thankfully that came out, but I learned to not use marking tools that I haven't tested first and make sure that it comes out, because that could have been a disaster. It would have ruined my dress. This is the first knit garment that I ever made, because in college we were all told that knit fabric was hard and we couldn't sew with it. Like, we actually were not allowed to use knit fabric for our projects in college, which, when you think about it, you think about being in a design program, that's really stupid. It worked out well. I did stretch out the neckline because it's the first neck band that I've ever made for a knit dress, and I didn't realize that it was going to stretch that much. And once again, there is no finishing on the inside of this, but that's okay because it's knit. It's not really super important. I have worn and washed this many, many times, and you can see that the seams all still look nice. They're still laying flat, so that's all good. This is like one of my first knit travel dresses. I absolutely love this dress. Even though the neckline is a little bit stretched out, that's okay. But that was my first experience with knit, and this is kind of a it's not super, super stretchy. It is 100% cotton, so there's no added, spandex or lycra to it. So it's not a 4-way stretch. It's just more of a 2-way stretch. It doesn't really stretch lengthwise. It just stretches widthwise. So I thought that would be something that would be easy to work with. And then I made it again in a different variation in the same size. So this is a 16. And because the knit doesn't stretch very much, it's comfortable. It doesn't really lose its shape. But this knit stretches a lot more. And that's kind of when I learned, this is still a cotton fabric, but there's just more stretch in it. And this one has a little bit of stretch lengthwise, but it's mostly widthwise, but it's definitely more than the first knit. And that's when I found out and kind of realized that all knits are not created equal, and they do not all work the same, even when you're using the same pattern. So this dress is way, way, way too big for me. It just kind of hangs on me. Maybe if I'd made it in a 14, it would have fit better. It's just too big. I could go back in and slim it down, but I just haven't ever. I don't really love the sleeves on this. They're just a little bit too bulky. So between these two dresses, I learned the importance of checking the sizing and the stretch of your knit, and then figuring out which pattern size is the best based on the amount of ease you need. So it's still a learning process. I'm getting better at it, but this pattern is what taught me that I need to do that every time I make something. So I wanted a wrap skirt. This is a simplicity pattern, but I didn't want a fake wrap skirt. I wanted a real wrap skirt that, slips through the hole in the waistband and looks nice, and then it's like a real wrap skirt. So I modified the pattern. And I didn't do it great because this is not the original waistband that went with this pattern. So I ended up having to remake it in just the aqua, and thankfully I could find fabric that matched. But this was one of those things where I was like, oh, I really should follow the pattern instructions, because I should have gotten a pattern that had this type of wrap skirt as opposed to the faux wrap skirt. I really, really liked it, and I really thought I'd ruined the waistband and the whole thing, but thankfully I was able to salvage it. But my learning was definitely follow the pattern, or get the pattern for what exactly you want instead of trying to figure it out, because like I said, first attempt was not successful. I did remake this in the correct way of sewing. So I did actually follow the pattern. It has a snap on it, just to show you guys. Like, this is what it looks like when it's just a shorter version. And I do like this skirt. It's a great pattern. I worn this one quite a bit. And then I made it again because someone asked about how do you put the pocket on the front of it. And so I made it again in this fabric. Which brings me to the point that this was the first effort, which is okay. This was the second effort, which was much better, following the pattern instructions. And this was the third one. So by the third time I sewed it, not only had I figured out the waistband and the pattern instructions of how to do that, but it was much, much faster to do because I'd already done it 2 other times. So when you find a pattern you like and you want to make it in a variety of fabrics, just keep in mind that that first time is going to be the hardest because it's the learning curve. And then once you figure out how to do it, if you keep doing it and you stay in, like, the timeline of like, okay, I'm going to make this and I'll go make something else and come back, you don't lose those skills. The more you sew something, the more you practice it, the better you get. So by the time I got to the third skirt, I was doing a really good job. This is another skirt that I made back in the day. I do not remember exactly when this happened. This is a batik fabric that I bought back in college from High Fashion here in Houston, and I have had it forever and ever and ever. So I bought this in my early 20s, and it just sat in the drawer because I just couldn't find something I liked. And then I found this pattern, and I thought, wow, that looks really cool with the designs, and I'm going to make this skirt, and it's going to be really pretty. And while I'm now rethinking my white top stitching idea, if I redid this, I would not have done that in white. I would have done it in navy to blend in with the back. Same with the hem. It's okay, but I wish it looked a little different. The big learning thing from this skirt was check your fabric, because I have a lot more yardage of this, but I cut it out not realizing there's a tiny little hole right here because I didn't check my fabric. Now, thankfully, I was able to fix it. I put a patch in it. There's a whole video about this process, and when I realized this the first time I wore it, when I could see skin through the hole. And that was what my number one learning point from this was: check your fabric. If I had just checked my fabric, I could have cut it differently because I still have like 2.5 yards, and I wouldn't have had to have, gone through all the trouble and effort, and then that sinking feeling in your chest when you're like, oh my gosh, there's a hole in it. And not even on a side seam, like right next to the center front seam, right in the middle of the front of the dress. And I was just like, oh my gosh, how did I not do this? Because I'd never had fabric that had a tiny little hole in it. But, I've been carting this fabric around for almost 20 something years. It's not surprising that there's a tiny little hole in one piece of it. So let that be a lesson. Check your fabric for any kind of holes or defects or imperfections so that you don't go through and make the entire garment and then wear it the first time and realize what actually happened. So this is one of those projects that I spent a lot of time placing the fabric because I wanted it to, look good with the pattern. I wanted this center back to be matched up so that the design worked all together. And so that was a huge challenge in and of itself, and that took a lot of time. But the rest of it I kind of rushed because I was going on vacation and I wanted to take this top with me. And so it's a little bit sloppy around this whole edge with the facing. Um, I didn't really ease any of it in like I was supposed to. I just kind of folded under the edge and then stitched it. And then I top stitched it to just hold it in place, which doesn't look fabulous. The other thing that I did not do, which I have to demonstrate, is check the fit before I put on this front facing. The original top had buttons down the front, and that's fine. I didn't put buttons in because I was planning to wear it as a jacket over tank tops. But let me just show you what happens with the bust here, because this is the funky part. So it's supposed to fit and not be weird and lumpy. And so this side looks nice. That side, when you got it on, it's like nice and smooth. It's gathered, but it's pretty. This side has this weird bubble in it here, which kind of sticks out. So when I wear it, it looks like I have lumpy boobs, but just on one side. So that was something I learned of, hey, when you have this interesting detail, like the gathers on the bust line, maybe you should check and make sure that those gathers are even, number one, and number two, that they hit your bust where it needs to be, because otherwise you get this weird lumpy kind of bubble boob on this one side, but then the other side looks fine. So here's the question. Should I go back in, take this all out, fix the gathers, put this all back together correctly? Because this is not done very well It's just top stitched and put together because I was rushing. And so I think I'm going to add that to the list of things that need to be fixed, along with the, finishing details, some seam finishes, some, you know, fixing the shoulder darts on that one dress, and come back to this at some point. And, when I got some time, just rip it all out, redo it, because I can make it look better. And I know that with the time, I'll be happier with it and I'll be more excited to wear it. Now, I wear this all the time. I don't care that it's got that weird boob thing going on. And I usually forget about it until I put it on. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot that I need to go redo this because I love this top. I love the colors. And that goes to my point of when you sew with fabric you love, you want to save it. You want to fix it. You want to do a good job when you sew it the first time and not rush it, even though sometimes you might because you want to take it on vacation with you. So I can honestly say that with these fabrics, I love them. And so going back to fix these projects and make them better and improve them so that they're wearable is not a hardship, for the simple reason that I love, love, love the fabric. It's also okay if you still keep making the same mistakes when you're coming back to sewing after a long time away. So even though I, made these patterns and sewed up the designs without any instructions, I haven't done any sewing, or had not done any sewing regularly prior to 2020. I mean, I had made costumes here and there, and I'd have these costuming projects, but it wasn't really this steady, I'm going to be sewing and, making so many projects a month or anything like that up until 2020. And I was rusty. And these garments show that. And the way I look at it is that everything you make has the opportunity to be a learning experience and has the opportunity to help you stretch your skills and get better at doing something. Because you've heard that saying that done is better than perfect, and I disagree with that. I think well done is better than perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you can look at something and say, yeah, I did a really good job on that and I did the best I could at that point in time, then it's still a success. The same goes for all of these newer 2020, 2021 makes of, I was just getting back into it. I hadn't been doing this in a while. I hadn't used a commercial pattern in forever. And that's kind of the whole point of sewing, right? Is getting better at your craft, learning new skills, and, expanding what you can do and how you sew. And I think that's worthwhile. I think that's the whole point of it. And that's what makes it fun. And that's what makes an adventure. Because you never know what's going to happen when you sit down at your sewing machine. And some days, everything goes great. I get all my seams sewn, everything's perfect, it all works, I don't have to rip anything out. And other days, I'm literally ripping out every seam I sew and restarting. So it just depends on what the project is and how I'm feeling that day. So I want to know, do you have any sewing projects that you've been working on or that you've worked on in the past that didn't turn out quite as well as you had hoped, but you learned something from them? Let me know. I can't wait to hear from you.